Heart and Hand is delighted to be sponsored by the Rangers Youth Development Company. Profit from their products helps support the Rangers Youth Programme, and congratulations to Kenneth Cooper, who won RYDC's latest Big Blue jackpot prize of $16,290 recently. Over 18s can play, and you can be a winner like Kenneth and so many other Rangers fans very soon. The more tickets sold, the bigger the prize will be, and all profit goes to the Rangers Academy. RYDC have donated more than $12.5 million to date. Visit rydc.co.uk, that's rydc.co.uk now for full details on all of their products, or click the link in the description to sign up for Rangers Lotto. Hello everyone, and welcome to Heart and Hand, the Rangers podcast. My name is David Edgar, and as always, I am your host. And to try to discuss in a sensible, calm and rational manner the events of yesterday, another, disappointing, doesn't begin to cover it, does it, loss in the Scottish Cup to Celtic. Joining me is, of course, our regular Monday guest, Davy Graham. Hello, David.
Davy, listeners, good afternoon.
Well, that was a sore one.
And that's the end of the pod. See you next week, folks.
Basically, yes.
Yeah. Listen, look, it's never easy to try to unpack an old firm. I think, we're inevitably, Davy, going to talk about both matches, as in last weekend's League 2 draw a little bit as well, because in many ways they're sort of almost like one big 3.5 hour torture session. I think I cannot remember, bar maybe during COVID, where we were sort of so dominant against such a poor Celtic side as we have been, particularly in the first half last week, and for basically the majority of the 2 hours, certainly statistically. We, however, are weak, impotent, spineless, leaderless, heartless, and I really have now wider concerns again about the wider infrastructure round this squad, and again what is going to come in the summer again. So yeah, it's almost like, eat, sleep, rinse, repeat, and here we go again.
I think that when you lose a big game like that, there's always going to be a reaction and a post-mortem, and it comes in different ways. For some people, it's, of course, sack the manager. For others, it's the players are useless. For others, still, it's, okay, well, I can see what we're trying to do. We're not that far away. And it all just comes from the same sense of extreme disappointment, because these were two games that I felt were very winnable. And to be honest, I was expecting us to win, and we didn't do so. And that's going to lead to this age-old, is it quality, is it mentality debate, David. Now, we know that Danny Rule does not like questions on the mentality of his squad. He bats them away, and he was asked again about it yesterday. But as we mentioned last week, it's going to keep happening to these questions until there's more proof of a winning mentality, which at the moment there simply isn't. And I think for the supporters, the reason we question it is that it does seem that every time Rangers in the last couple of years, so different players involved, different management teams, etc., God, even different owners, but every time Rangers get close to finishing something, then they wobble. So that is, of course, going to lead to questions on mentality. Now, Danny Rule said yesterday, it's quality. It was being able to convert these opportunities. And I think that it's not always binary. It doesn't always have to be one or the other. There can be shades of grey, and there can be an intermingling. I would say last week was mentality, the 2-each draw, because I thought the team panicked in the second half. I didn't see that sense of panic yesterday. I thought that, as you said, Rangers dominated the game, clearly. If you want to go all Football Manager about it, statistically, Rangers were the dominant side in that game, and I don't think anyone would argue with that. But it was a quality issue yesterday, because we didn't have the quality to finish them. We didn't have the quality to make the goalkeeper make enough saves and find that winning goal. the week before I did think was more mentality because, as I say, we were 2-0 up and cruising, lost a goal, and then completely fell out the game and panicked. I think yesterday was not that, but it did show you a lack of the quality that's needed to carry over the end. However, is it a bit chicken and egg then to say, well, what comes first? Because clearly, if you've got a bit more quality in the team, people might relax. Well, I've got him here. He's going to get us at this. I know that he'll deliver for us. A bit more trust in that helps the mentality. Or is it if you have a leader, then the same happens the other way? People relax and play better and show a wee bit more, don't tighten up in front of goal, etc. I don't really know, but I think over the 2 games, it's proved that whatever side of that debate you come down on, I think we'd all agree that something is lacking.
Yeah, I mean, my wider concern here, and to reiterate what you said in terms of, I mean, it was not an unfair expectation that we won the last 2 games, particularly yesterday, given the fact that, like, off the top of my head, they were missing. I mean, they don't really have a recognised goalkeeper, full stop. Carter Vickers is out. That Johnson out. Jota, McGregor, Tierney, that other boy with a stupid name, Abanaccio or some, I don't really know or care. But the point is, bar Derek Cornelius, we had an entirely fit and available side, and that then has to raise wider questions around. It's not about that we haven't spent enough money. I mean, there was always this argument to say, well, look how much was spent. We can't be expecting. I mean, when you see what was spent in terms of a squad, and there's not enough quality, well, you're thinking, well, right, okay, well then the recruitment's not good enough then because we haven't brought in players that are good enough. But again, like, let's be honest, and I don't even want to put him in this like section because it's unfair, but like, Paul Gascoigne wasn't a leader. Paul Gascoigne was a total messer and, spent his entire career, doing silly things, as did people like Kyle Lafferty, and again, I'm maybe not likening Gaza and Laugh, but what I'm saying is that there have been players who have an unquestioned quality. Like Kyle Lafferty would have scored for us yesterday in his prime. Freak's sake, I think he might even have a chance or two yesterday to score even now. That doesn't mean that they were ever going to get the captain's armband, but what it did mean was there were players in the team who probably were of lesser quality, but had a winning, steely mentality. And like, dare I say it, you're probably at the stage, Davey, crying out for a Kirk Broadfoot, because at least you knew that, he's the type of player maybe not, grab the game by the scruff of the neck. And I think, really now we are at the stage where there isn't players that you could look around, even like a Carlos Bocanegra back in the day, not outstanding, amazing footballers, but players who certainly had a bit of gravitas and a bit of experience. Like, really now, and I don't want to sound overly critical of, your Tabs, your Shooters, your Butlins, but we don't have players. If the like of Nico Raskin is essentially a senior player, and he buzzes about almost a bit like sort of, a wee in there that's had too many E numbers. Like, you're getting yourself into a situation where saying, surely, and I go harken back to this Bomber Brown recruitment point, David. Like, surely, when all this data and statistics is set aside, someone goes and watches a player and goes, seeing a big old firm, a quarter final of a cup, whatever, semi final of a cup, I don't think he's going to cut it. Like, there's no one that could see that Gassama and say, bloody hell, he's a man for the trenches. Like, geez, he'd have white flagged it, before he even got to France.
Yeah, I mean, I think yesterday, that's again, it's difficult because, penalty shoots, you can lose penalty shooters. It does happen. I think the frustration for the Rangers supporters, it always seems to happen. And this is another way of it happening. But, 2-0 up last week in total control, don't get the job done, losing, as you say, the penalty shootouts or whatever, getting back into the race and then drawing at Livingston. And this is not just this season. It's not a new thing. It's something that's been ongoing for a while. So, of course, as supporters, we're going to look for, if you like, fixes because, well, there's clearly a problem. So we're going to look for fixes. And I'm not a professional coach. I'm not a professional sports person, so I can't claim that I have all those answers. So maybe the ones we look for are a little simplistic. And I know that, professionals within football say, heart and stuff like that. These are just words. And I'm like, well, Are they? Because, we can kind of see it when it's there and we can kind of see it when it isn't. And I think results play a part of it. So I think you need a whole range of, if you like, soft skills that maybe can't be tracked on a spreadsheet as well when you're in such a demanding environment. Manager made 2 changes yesterday, David, to the starting lineup. Nasser Jiga came in, and I have to say I thought he played very, very well when he returned to the side. Almost an admission, I think, from Rule about Suter's form, because he has been very, very poor recently. And I do think he's been at the heart of a number of problems. And to be honest, yesterday, when he came on, one of the problems with John Suter we saw is he starts off with a mistake, proceeds to make 3 inside the opening 4 minutes on his pitch, and suddenly Rangers, from looking absolutely totally assured at the back, started to look panic-filled. That is my issue with Suter. And, the fact he had the armband last week, if anything, this kind of just makes that worse for me, because here is a guy who, at the stage of his career he's at, the position he plays, and the sort of level of responsibility he has within the team, he should be a leader, right? And again, we can have the long debate about what that word means, but he should be. Whereas to me, he's still the guy that needs a Goldson next to him, as opposed to being a Goldson. And that isn't good enough for us at this point, not for the status that he has and where he should be in the squad.
Without sounding harsh, I don't think John Suter, and I think I maybe said this actually in a pod as recently as last week, I don't think John Suter was ever signed to be, Rangers captain. I don't think he was even necessarily signed to be a first choice or a sort of first top 2. I think he was signed as someone who had done very well in periods at Hearts, albeit he had injury issues, whose distribution for Hearts was very good, who is still, on his day, an old school defender. And there's no doubt on his day he has been very good for us. But I also think that he in many ways epitomises where we now are in terms of players that were brought in. He came in under Gio, but players that were brought in to expand the squad. So I suppose in many ways a little bit like Connor Barron, where I think for the second week in a row we'll say we actually missed Connor Barron. I don't think Connor Barron was ever be brought in to be the player that was missed in an old firm. I think bluntly someone like Raskin was, certainly someone like Skov Olsen was, and I think that he is a player that's totally anonymous and has been a victim of coming in January and loan to the old firm, and it's very difficult to come in January and loan in any league for any club, especially a club like ours, and do anything. But to go back to Suter, I think really in a way he's kind of been over promoted, and I think now that Danny Rowe's in this difficult situation where he is still not quite sure what his best starting 11 is. I think he's certainly not sure who he can trust off the bench and when to bring them off the bench. And I think really, again, broken record time, we need, like realistically, without exaggeration, a dozen players brought in the summer. And I think, David, I said in December, I remember us very clearly saying we need to bring in half a dozen players, 4 minimum, and they all need to be starters. Now, correct me if I'm wrong, Romans has come in, good things and bad things. Chukwueze probably his best game yesterday, and did well when he come on. Olsen, totally anonymous, and Nadiri is playing like a player who has moved up, realistically, at
Several
least the
levels.
standard of league in a different level. So you can't expect. So I think that the wider point is here, John Suter becomes a leader by default, basically because he's been there the longest, kind of to an extent because he's Scottish. But on that basis, like, you give Liam Kelly the armband. So, none of it kind of makes sense, does it?
No, I think there's a default element to Rangers senior players. And I've mentioned this before. I think that we sometimes in Scotland confuse experience with leadership. And the idea that it almost automatically arrives at your door the older you get.
Yeah.
And of course, you can be a very good pro and a very experienced pro and good around the place and helpful to younger players without necessarily commanding and showing and displaying that on-field leadership that would be moaned the lack of. And, for those of you who want to listen, you can listen back to last week's, and we went through it in a lot of detail, and I don't want to repeat the same things twice. It's clear to me anyway, there's an issue. It's clear to most people. Danny Rule may not agree, certainly publicly. I wonder if privately he feels a little different. I know that certainly in the past, previous managers have spoken, very highly about players' mentalities publicly, but then privately have admitted, yeah, we don't quite have that killer instinct. And I think that's probably the phrase yesterday, the lack of killer instinct that came to it, because these are two matches that Rangers should have won, which is probably what hurts a bit more, actually. It wasn't like we got cuffed at all. It's the fact that it's not a vintage Celtic side, and yet they've been able to get a good result for them in the draw, and then obviously win the tie yesterday, despite certainly yesterday barely doing anything worthy of the name at all other than defending. And we made life a little bit easier for them than we had to. And you mentioned there Scott Olsen. Now, did arrive in January. It's coming up now it's at least 6 weeks since his arrival. And it's not happening. And this is the issue, because Rangers, if they decide to sign him permanently this summer, are going to have to spend a lot of money, key player money, £8 million. That's a lot. And at the moment, he's not justifying that. Now, he's a guy who I think has a big upside, and if you can get him playing, but can we gamble on, we will get him playing next season? That's my concern. I think he really, really has to start. I think he's running out of room to show us, he's somebody that we can look at next season and say, yeah, we can hang our hat on him. Because that money, that's what it needs to be, David.
Well, look, I think that Scott Olsen again epitomises where we're at, because if we go, I'm not going to start listing the entire squad, but out of contract players next season, or players who are on loan, you have two goalkeepers in Wright and Kelly. You then have Tav, Cornelius McComa, Aaron Giga, Bailey Rice, Scott Olsen, Matondo, and Moore. Now, in a way, out of that list, there's probably only one player that you would really want to keep, and it's Mikey Moore, who, realistically, and I think Andy McGowan made a really good point last night on our chat, where he said Moore is still only 18. And look, I kind of said flippantly, yeah, he's a wee bit like Zalalam and the other guy, Adua, who we had under Warburton. He's clearly much better than that, with respect. But what I'm saying is, we were bringing in lads who were really young, and we're basically looking around going, oh, you've come from like a big club like Spurs or Arsenal, right? Go ahead there, son, win us the league. So I think Mikey Moore's done incredibly well. But again, it probably shows us where we've been in terms of levels, because there's not really anyone in that list, but possibly Giga after yesterday, that you go like, bloody hell, we really, really want to keep. And I think if Scott Olsen in a way kind of epitomises that where we are now at as a club. And what I mean by that is, like, if we see here, take Danny Rule, and I'm going to bring this up now, David, if you don't mind, this idea of getting rid of Danny Rule and having question marks over Danny Rule. Okay, it's legitimate to have question marks over a manager, particularly given our run of form. But please indulge me for a second, listeners. Danny Rule was beaten to the job last year by Russell Martin. Whether or not that's right or wrong, and I think probably all clearly agree it was a wrong decision, but he still was. He then had to actually extricate himself from the recruitment process, basically because, for his own reputation, we hung around for Muscat, it didn't work out, and then he kind of come back in. So Danny Rule, it was not our first choice under the new leadership and ownership. And I actually feel a degree of pity for him, because I think there's a lot of positives. But in reality, what is his support network? And I suppose if you read the Rangers review, Tom Lawrence talked about Ross Wilson, and listen, everybody was climbing over each other to get rid of Ross Wilson. But Ross Wilson and I work with him. Ross Wilson had many positives, and he's been in high positions of two Premiership clubs since leaving us. We haven't replaced Kevin Thelwell. I'm led to believe that Kevin Thelwell's son hasn't been seen in around training ground in months. Dan Purdy. What's Dan Purdy's role? Greta Steenson. What I'm wondering is here, in a way, who said Olsen's a good signing? Okay, fine. He's gone through the process. He clearly has not performed as we need. Who's actually working with the manager now? A, to put a shoulder, an arm around him, etc. But B, to actually start looking at the summer to say, well, listen, we're going to back you here, Danny. because we want you to be here for the longer term. Because ultimately, if we're all going to get into, let's just sack him in November if it doesn't work out, like, we're on a road to no town here, folks.
Yeah, and I think that's increasingly a topic of conversation because the fact of the matter is, you suffer back to back disappointments in an old firm at Ibrox, then fans are going to question you, and it's not off the back of just this. It's the fact that poor performance against Livingston, poor performance against Motherwell, poor performance against Hibs. That's our recent form is not good. I think it's like one win in the last
very
4
fair,
matches. So the form has tailed very badly. And again, some people get upset when you discuss the future of a manager and you say, well, and they tend to think any criticism of a manager means you're saying he needs to go. And I'm not. I know that that's modern football discourse. And I know that, you just need to, any club in the UK suffers a bad result, you go online and there'll be supporters of that club, or you put on the radio and there'll be supporters of that club demanding the manager goes. It doesn't mean that the vast majority feel that way. And it doesn't mean that the vast majority are saying that. But you can say, our form isn't very good recently. You can say, I thought he picked the wrong team at Motherwell. You can say, I thought he got the substitutions wrong last week. All of these are valid points, right? It doesn't mean you're saying, so he absolutely needs to be sacked. The reality of the situation is at Rangers, David, that if you don't deliver in the bigger matches, and Rangers have not been delivering, then you're going to be under pressure. Fans are going to have concerns about you. And I think that it's unrealistic to suggest that there won't be conversations about Danny Rule. I mean, personally, I think obviously he's going to be at least here to the end of the season, and so he should be. And if he picks up dramatically, then Rangers are going to come out and it'll end all sort of discussion on that. If Rangers continue to get worse, he'll be under pressure. But I don't really know any major club in Britain where that wouldn't be the case.
No. And I agree with everything that you say there. And, ultimately, we put a manager in the dugout. He picks the team. And, as is now the trend in modern football, well, if it doesn't work out, you sack him. And I think one thing I was actually talking to someone about the other day, where when you actually look back, a lot of our, Sir Alex Ferguson signings, probably Walter Smith signings, others, you were able to sign players in November, kind of just out of the blue. And I think now, the window does kind of leave you, right, well, this is what I've got, this is my lot for a certain period of time. And I think what my wider concern is, I agree, you can have legitimate, you can hold two views here. You can have legitimate concerns over the manager's selection, over the manager's subs, over what's happening in the training ground, over the performance of the squad linked to his tactics, etc. No problem. But I also think within that, you can also hold a view to say, well, what role does the manager play in recruitment? What role do people within his infrastructure, the infrastructure that's put in place around him? Because we've always heard where, we were so, fans couldn't shout loud enough about wanting a director of football. We eventually got Mark Allen, then we got Ross Wilson, and then Mick Beale kind of did his own thing. And then obviously then we've brought in Kevin Thelwell, etc. And I suppose what I'm saying is here, we have a new ownership model, and the Americans were brought in to, modernize the club and provide sort of unprecedented, business experience and sport, etc. And look, there have been plenty of positives so far. But, I also still hark back here, listeners, to the manager can only do so much. And I still have wider concerns over the infrastructure, over who is accountable to putting the players at the manager's disposal. Because it feels to me, there's a famous line in politics that says, people are more than happy to be responsible, but they're not happy to be accountable. And I think at the moment, really probably for the fan advisory board, there are, legitimate questions to be had over, the entire football department, in my view.
No, I don't disagree with that at all. And people are going to question when you're not winning. And Rangers are not winning, so people are going to question it. And I think, for a lot of supporters, there comes a point with a manager where they just don't trust them, and then it's very difficult to get them back. Not possible, but very difficult to bring them back from that. But he needs results, and he needs results, starting
Davey,
Sunday, basically.
Yeah, not trying to take over being the host for a second, but I mean, let me ask you, what at this stage can the manager do between now and the end of the season to, alleviate those concerns? I know what my answer is, but
You need to win games, and I know that sounds obvious, but it is true. It's the only currency at Rangers that protects a manager is winning games. Rangers haven't won enough games in the last month. There were very little conversations about his future before that, and I know, incidentally, that I think that someone like Danny Rule coming into the job, it's about how quickly you learn it. Because I've seen a lot of people saying, "Well, he's just another Clement," and Clement never really fully grasped it. I think that's fair to say. I would agree with that. And I think that, for Rule, yes, you did get back into a title race, and it was good, but it isn't an achievement at the club you're at, right? Even though it may be at other clubs, and even though other professionals in football might say to you, that's great, it doesn't carry any currency with the support. So what Rangers now need to do is, clearly go out there and start winning games. We haven't been winning enough games. We have a trip to Paisley on Sunday. It'll be a difficult match. Rangers have to win that by hook or by crook. They've got to come out of that with a result. Then Aberdeen, they've got to win that. Wins begin to insulate a manager from the situation that he's in. There will still be concerns, by the way, because 2 massive matches against Celtic in a week, no wins. So that is going to be a stick that will be used to beat them until Rangers deliver in a very big match. And I know people will say the New Year game, and that is true, but a New Year game is only ever a step towards something. It's not, like a semi-final. So you don't get a reward for winning it there and then. So people will kind of forget it quickly. That's going to continue to haunt him. But this is maybe I am just too much of an optimist. I got pulled up for it yesterday, and it's true, because I can get really down after defeat, and then I will pick myself up the next day. You know me, I'm like a bear with a sore arse the night before. But the next day I'll pick myself up and go, do you know what? It's in the past, nothing I can do about it. Let's move forward. So I would be looking at it, if it was me and I was that squad, I'd be looking at this as an opportunity to go, do you know what? A lot of people doubting us. Let's go out there. We'll start on Sunday. We pick up the win and we take it from there. I just worry that sometimes they get overwhelmed with, what if we don't win? And that seeps into the performances.
which probably goes back to the quality versus, hard leadership discussion. I think it's. I'm not going out on a limb here, so don't interpret this, listeners, as I'm saying if we don't win the league, Danny Rule is, for Danny Rule get his P45. I'm not saying that, but what I'm saying is that the margins are so tight now that we can still end up fourth and we can still end up first. And I think, Davey, what you've said quite clearly is there probably is a sense now amongst the support, a little bit like as Gassama was walking up to take the penalty yesterday. There were Bears who were quite clearly just starting to kind of mosey towards the door,
I
because
think everyone knew he was missing.
everyone,
He looked like, you
including
can tell,
him,
we've all seen enough penalty shooters over the
yeah,
years.
everyone, including him, knew he was missing. And I hate to be this guy. I just think he is pretty much ran out of road. But given Ant-Man has broken Little Delph, neither has Bayrami. I just don't know. Maybe that's a conversation for a wider day. But I feel now that we need to, as you say, game on game, will build the confidence again in the squad, both within the squad but also within the support about the squad, to try to build momentum over the last 9 games, because we had the pod the day after we lost to Tynecastle just before Christmas, where I remember I was saying, first time I've really looked forward to a game in a long time here. And after, you kind of very elegantly said, well, why the fuck were you feeling like that? And I think in reality, we're all at that moment now where, we're all kind of down. I think the squad will be down as well. And really, for me, he's got to build momentum that, look, if we don't win the league, which I think is a stretch, I think we've got to build momentum, and we've got to get that second place, because yeah, it's very, very difficult if we don't.
I've had this debate with a lot of people about the supporters, right, and the fact that we do sometimes get very down. And I think it is noticeable. If you look at the 4 teams that have been discussed as in the title race, 3 of them are really excited about it, and 1 of them has resigned, and that's us.
Mm-hmm.
But what I say to people when they make this point is, well, of course, because that's Rangers fans have got all these years of evidence that that's what happened. You can't blame them for expecting the thing that always has happened in the past to happen. Up until it doesn't happen, then of course they're going to expect that. And this is what I mean about when people try to say about the fans and atmosphere and stuff. It's like, well, yeah, to a point, but we can't change this, right? We can't change how we feel. It's based on the evidence that's been presented to us. You can, by winning, you can change it, but we don't have any agency in that. It's up to you to deliver. And until they do, then of course fans are going to think that it's going to go the way that it has went the last 10 years. Of course we're going to think that. How can we not?
Yeah, I mean, it's human nature to, I suppose, be trained to accept, and I never have, but you know, there's almost a level where this is like the new normal, especially amongst the younger generation, and it shouldn't be, and we cannot allow that to seep in. But you know, I think now it's very much over to the manager and over to the players, not the pressure playing at Rangers. Like, the next game is the biggest game, and I think, if we don't get 3 points, I think we're in crisis territory, and that's the reality of the situation. And I've said this before, having been inside the tent coming up to an international break, those games, Paisley and then Aberdeen at home, are so important to try to build a kind of positivity and a feel good factor going into that international break, because that's a long, long time without a match.
Now on to, of course, the scenes after the match. For those of you who have been on Mars, you might not know that when the winning penalty went in, Celtic fans ran onto the pitch, and a significant number of them ran up to the halfway line to start taunting the Rangers supporters in the Copland, and generally Rangers supporters in general. They continued to do this for about 4 or 5 minutes. The police didn't seem to have a lot of interest in ushering them off the pitch. Eventually, reacting to the provocation, some Rangers supporters ran onto the pitch. I think the way that some people are talking, you would have thought, it was like the Warriors out there. It wasn't, right? Not a lot happened, but there were flares thrown back and forth. There were, various skirmishes and whatnot. But it lasted a few minutes. It was pretty unedifying spectacle. And of course, the blame game goes out. Now, David, first of all, I mentioned this on our flagship. I find, especially on social media, a little tiresome because people pretend they're neutral when they're not, right? There are no honest brokers in this situation. People who like Rangers will side with their fans. People who like Celtic will side with their fans. And neutrals who don't like either of us will blame both, right? Now, I'm a Rangers fan and I have my biases, and I'll admit to that up front before I say anything here. But what I will say is that the behaviour of Celtic yesterday, Celtic supporters, an element of their supporters, was reprehensible. The Broomlin has been left in an absolute state through graffiti, some vile graffiti, including the references to the Ibrox disaster. Seats have been pulled out and smashed up, and LED advertising hoardings have been broken down. They were 100% going on the pitch and trying to get at the goals. There's no doubt about that. And of course, some of their media cheerleaders come and say, well, it's understandable. I mean, they were joyous. They just won a big penalty shootout. That wasn't spontaneous, right? I was down at that end on the gantry yesterday. It wasn't spontaneous. When, I think it was Kavanka, was going up to hit the penalty, and they knew if he scored, they won. They were getting ready. You saw them getting in position, planning it. So that can't be spontaneous then, right? Just by default. So it wasn't spontaneous. So spare me that bullshit, right? Oh, they were just happy and they spilled out. Nonsense. The police had a very bad day yesterday. And when our lads go to Parkhead, you've got to be in the night before. And yet there were Celtic fans coming into the ground yesterday. Well, I mean, it wasn't full at 12 o'clock. So there's a question there. They had already spilled onto the pitch in smaller numbers, but they had done it when they had a goal disallowed in the first half. So for the police not to know that this was likely to happen, I think is nonsense. And then, as I say, there was no rush to get them off the park. Now, our lads shouldn't have ran on the park, 100%, right? They shouldn't have. But if you want to talk about spontaneous, they were goaded and they gave in to that and reacted, right? But if someone comes to your house, smashes it up, and then taunts you about it, you probably will lose the rag. And people have said to me today, oh, you must condemn this, you must condemn this. And I'm like, of course, nobody wants to see scenes like that, right? It doesn't reflect well on the support at all. It doesn't reflect well on the club. But if I'm honest, 30 years ago, I'm on that pitch with them, right? When I was younger, drunk, angry after a loss. Now, don't get me wrong, I would probably have, I would have been as much use as a fucking chocolate fire guard. I would have fallen and knocked myself out and then woke up in the cells. But I can understand that spontaneous rage at that happening in our home. And the idea that, they're just as bad as each other. Well, if there's no provocation yesterday, that doesn't happen. Celtic had been talking about for weeks, the fans, about this, about free Broomlin, all this pish, right? That they were going to do this. And they admitted to it. And this is not new, this type of behaviour. They have an element of their support that don't get into their own ground, let us not forget, because of their behaviour. And then for the police to not have plans in place to stop them breaking into the stadium and letting in ticketless fans, which we know happened, there's video of it. For them not to have checks in place to stop them coming through, because you need to go through 2 ticket checks before you even get onto the stadium concourse at Parkhead as a Rangers supporter. So why that wasn't in place, I don't know. And then not ringing those 2 stands in particular. It used to be standard practice in an Old Firm game, in games in general, when I was growing up, that what would happen is the cops, after a goal, would ring the stadium, and at full time, or coming up to full time, they would ring it, and it made it very, very difficult to happen. They didn't do that yesterday. I think there is a fair bit of blame to go around. What I am not prepared to accept is it being launched in one direction, i.e. us, as if we were either the instigators or the only ones involved in this. There is a level of entitlement about that element of the Celtic support, and as I say, their own club thinks it, because they feel that their desire to do something makes it acceptable to do it, and everyone else has to go along with it. And if they don't, they go into a huff and they complain about their human rights. So they feel, well, we wanted on the pitch to celebrate. You're not allowed on the pitch. So that argument is pish, right? But they'll go, but we wanted to do it and therefore we should be allowed to do it. No, that's not how that works, right? That a desire to do something is not a qualification or an enabler to do it. And that's what we saw yesterday. So for me, yep, there will be action taken. I think it's obvious and it's understandable. But I think there are a lot of people in this who need to take a look at themselves, and not merely, as of course is being suggested in the media, Rangers supporters.
Well, I am going to try to break this down into as simple terms as possible. I think firstly we'll start with the SFA, David, and indulge me for a second, listeners. I would probably pour yourself a cup of tea here because this will take a few minutes. Let's start with the SFA. The SFA threatened us with court action if we refused to allocate the Broomloan stand. They actually said that if we went to court and lost, they could give up to 20%. So that would have been the Broomloan, and I don't even know how that would have worked. The Broomloan in the corner, and I don't know, whatever. So the SFA suggested, in fact, they didn't suggest, the SFA enforced us to accept a diktat, actually to the point where the compliance officer was going to be involved. I forgot we even had a compliance officer. So that's the first point. The second point, I am very fortunate and very blessed to have attended countless Old Firms, pre-administration, during the time we're in the lower leagues, post-administration, back in the good times, big times. I was there as an employee. I was there during COVID behind closed doors as an employee. I have been there since as a supporter. Um, I am further blessed that I have attended matches at some of the biggest stadiums in the world: the Bernabeu, Anfield, Old Trafford, the San Siro. I have to say, yesterday, out of all the old firms I've been at and all the matches, including away to Fenerbahce, away to Budapest, Prague, Serbia, that was the worst, most pitiful policing operation I have ever seen. I arrived in a bus from Belfast and I was sitting in traffic coming down off Drumbeck Road, and there was a bus beside us that started to unload said bus. It's full of Celtic fans. That was at about 11:30, David. So they clearly didn't even ignore the the timings. They ignored the directions to the match.
Mm.
Um, Post match, David, we were in the same bus coming out of Helen Street, and there were another Celtic fans walking down past, which ended up resulting in another bus a few down from ours on the list, ending up in a scuffle with some of their fans. No police in sight. Um, what is more, and what I don't understand, is why the threshold for an old firm, which is one of the most contested games in world football, is so low. Why, whenever Maccabi Tel Aviv fans come, there's literally a national policing crisis because of the fear of fans becoming contact. But yesterday, we expected stewards, whenever the penalties were taking place, on minimum wage, David, to stand like paper tigers to stop fans coming on the pitch. Um, the policing operation, whether you can blame the SNP and the cuts, whether you blame inexperience from the police, totally unacceptable. Um, the next people that I believe, David, need to accept blame is our club, and the reason I believe that is because that is the first time that I have seen an old firm take place where there wasn't a clear barrier and a tunnel where away fans came in and out. Now, uh, the police are allegedly saying Rangers wanted to have 360 access to the Stadium Bowl. I don't understand why. I don't understand what reasoning there was for that, unless we have changed a new security system or new security personnel that wanted to put their own stamp on it. But quite frankly, if they did, that stamp was an absolute shambles. And, David, you make a valid point. We are liable as a club for their behaviour. So if they end up falling, if an away fan falls down a set of steps and breaks his ankle, he doesn't sue Police Scotland because of their operation being shambles. He doesn't, and we'll get to them in a minute, he doesn't sue his own club for their poor messaging, etc. He sues the people whose names are on the safety certificate. So I don't understand how we've decided to change a tried and tested plan that the police have supported for years. Um, Adding in then the fact that I am also told that there was a request for external resources which had to come from outside the city, which, which is all entirely shambolic. And lastly, and apologies, listeners, I did say this would take some time. The last, and in my view, clear blame has to then go at the door of our friends from across the city. Now, listen, these people have form. The form's so bad that they are banned from their own stadium. These are people who are highly politicised, who for years have got away with doing whatever they want, singing about the IRA, putting up IRA banners about IRA terrorists, dead or alive, whatever the case may be, using flares whenever they want. Um, if you recall 2022, Rangers fans' wives being attacked with bottles and other masonry, etc. Um, you know, I just don't understand how then there has been such a pathetic, inadequate response where they've been allowed to burst through turnstiles, burst through fire doors, double up in turnstiles, come with the counterfeit tickets, come in, write about 66, and I made the point earlier in Talksport, say if you wrote about the 97 in Hillsborough, you'd be jailed, and rightly so, singing about the 66, singing about the IRA. I mean, in reality, flying flags of prescribed organisations. These people, um, have been allowed to get away. This is not an isolated incident, David. These people have been allowed to get away with it for years. Let's make no mistake about it. When they scored their penalties, some of their players ran towards our fans to goad. Some of them ran towards their own fans. Some of their subs jumped into the crowd. One of their players swung on the crossbar. Their legendary manager stood and got selfies on the pitch. Colin McGregor ran around like he always does, like he's got the freedom of Glasgow. I mean, these people have to accept the blame. I mean, they've damaged the club to the tune of literally thousands of pounds. And the last point I'll make is, because I'm sure there's plenty of people that subscribe and listen to the Flagship from the other side of the city. We're not going to sit here and say, oh yeah, no Rangers fans went on the pitch. Yes, they did. Some of them went on with face coverings. Um, you make a valid point, David. They saw red, they were goaded, they ran on the pitch. They shouldn't have been allowed on the pitch because there should have been a line of tactical support, trained police operatives to handle public order situations. I this season have seen better policing at Irish League games. The behaviour of the away support, they were itching for that. They built it up all week. Um, it's a pity that some Rangers fans took the bait. But anybody out there who's going to try to make this about Rangers fans, and there was an article by someone that will remain nameless, you'll all work out who it is, basically hammering Rangers fans from start to finish in one of the red top rags today. Quite frankly, pathetic but expected. And look, the last thing I'll finish on, I'm actually going to finish on something Tom English said, David, listeners, which you'll think, bloody hell, he's lost the plot on a Monday afternoon. But, you know, Tom English has highlighted this in a very fair way, where he has said that a return, there were seven and a half thousand of them at Ibrox, a return to the way things were pre 2018. Mistake, big mistake. First good point. Initially, Rangers fans in the Copeland reacted, a tiny number, fair, threatening to pile on to the pitch, and they were shoved back in quick order. More Celtic fans streamed on, dancing, waving, cajoling, red rags, the Rangers bull. Um, that sums the thing up for me. If there aren't as many of them brought in, if there's a better policing exercise carried out, um, none of that happens. And I stand by that. And apologies, listeners, I've gone on far too long, but I think and I hope you all agree with those points I've made.
Yeah, and I think that sometimes with some of our supporters, I'll see things like, we need our own house in order before we can criticise others. No, we don't. We do need to get our own house in order, absolutely. But the idea then that it's invalid for the vast majority of fans who didn't go on the pitch yesterday to not be appalled at the behaviour of Celtic supporters. And it's that attitude that has let them away with all that stuff that you've mentioned there. Because if that attitude is out there, or you can't complain about anything until there's no problems in your support, they're going to highlight problems and make up problems about our support to avoid having to do that. So no, I don't subscribe to that idea at all. To be honest, I think that whoever did wrong yesterday, and I think we all agree that people did, they'll be punished. That's actions of consequences. That's fair enough. But I think what they have absolutely done for a support that has been banging on about getting the full allocations back, them not us, is they've fucked it. That will never happen now. It's done. It's over.
Can I make a point, David? And I was asked by Jim Wido, what about Rangers fans, this ultra culture and all these things. I have to say, like I have a fairly like low or high bar, I suppose, in terms of being offended. Um, I get there's health and safety concerns, but I think the amount of times clubs, not just kind of football authorities, but clubs use footage of flares, of tifos, of huge flags on big poles, etc. That adds to the atmosphere, right? In fact, see whatever they want to sing. It actually doesn't bother me, and I'm sure there's people on the other side of the city say the same. But where the line stops is I feel to recall times where our own support, because it hasn't happened, that's why I can't recall it, have attacked stewards and battered them within our own ground. I have failed to find times where our own support have attacked team buses, have attacked their own team bus, have attacked their stadium. Listen, our supporters, there's an element that aren't angels by any stretch, but I actually think that, we're quite a compliant support. I know there'll be some people scoffing, saying, "Oh yeah, compliant. You blocked the team bus from Russell Martin, had to get a police escort, etc." Listen, here's the reality: there are supporters groups, ultra groups across the world who have done all sorts of mad stuff. But Bundesliga yesterday, they cut the cord in the VAR machine because they thought that the decision was going against them. Look, I do not accept this idea that Rangers have got, a problem with, you know, a small group. I mean, are there times where the songbook is questionable? Yeah, I mean, it depends what your viewing things are, but, I accept things like that at times. Are there times where behaviour, particularly away in Europe, etc., it leaves, a lot to be desired? Yeah, possibly, but that's not a Rangers problem. That's a football problem. That's a societal problem. I don't understand how every time something happens, it becomes all about Rangers. The media is dominated by it. Politicians are falling over each other to target us. And I think it's moments like this where we know and realise who our friends are, and quite frankly, how few friends we have.
No, I totally agree. And I think that the fact is that's, I go back to my point right at the start of this. There are no honest brokers. There are no neutrals in this. And therefore trying to appeal to these neutrals. And some of our fans will say that. It's like, we've got to get this across to who? Nobody hasn't made their mind up already. It's that simple. But in the final analysis, at an Old Firm match, if one set of supporters at either ground run on after their team wins, at the away ground, the away support, and starts taunting the home crowd, some people are going to come on and chase them, right? Maybe it shouldn't happen, but it's going to happen. And we need to be realistic about it. And in the old days, we used to stop it happening, and then it didn't happen. Yesterday, the authorities, the clubs, they didn't do that, and this is what happens. And to be honest, as I say, the idea then that it's used by people to condemn the whole Rangers sport, which it is just such agenda-led bullshit that it's not even worthy of the discussion. It's just complete and utter nonsense. Anyway, that will do us for this week here on Heart and Hand. My thanks to my guest, David Graham.
Davey, thank you. Listeners, thank you. It wasn't easy, but we'll be back next Monday either way.
That is the thing, right? And as I say, I said yesterday, it's hard to have any faith in this team. Just 5 minutes after the game, did a show, and it was like, hard to have any faith in this team. And a listener said, "Well, actually, you do have faith in the team. By the time the next game comes around, you'll be bang up for it." And I thought, no, you're right. You're right. I will. Even in my heart of hearts, I'll be thinking, I'm not sure about this today. I'll be bang up for it and ready. But that's part of being a supporter. You keep going. As painful as it can be, and yesterday was a right kick in the nuts, it's you pick yourself up and you go again. That, to me, is the essence of being a supporter. And you hope and you wait for the better times and you enjoy them when they come. But, it would be great if we could bring them a bit quicker, right enough. My thanks to our producers in London, Mike Lee and Paul Miles, and my thanks to you, most of all, for listening. As Davey says, we'll be back next week. Until then, thanks for listening. Take care, everybody. Bye-bye. Please check out our sponsors NordVPN for the best in online security. It's the best VPN on the market, and you can try it risk-free now with a 30-day money-back guarantee by visiting nordvpn.com/heartandhand. That's nordvpn.com/heartandhand, and it's risk-free with a 30-day money-back guarantee.